"You're holding up progress with these excessive concerns," my manager said, sliding the termination letter across his desk. "We need people who understand deadlines matter more than hypothetical problems." My name is Reid, 54, and I've dedicated 28 years to the construction industry in Portland, Oregon. I started hauling materials and worked my way up to site safety coordinator at Horizon Builders. I know the sound of a properly balanced crane, the look of a correct concrete pour, and the feel of properly installed support beams. More importantly, I recognize when something isn't right. For the last 6 months, I'd been overseeing the Harborview Plaza project, a 12-story mixed-use building that would be the centerpiece of the downtown revitalization. The project was already 3 weeks behind when they brought in Alex Parker, a 34-year-old executive from a prestigious San Francisco development firm. His first day, he walked the site with a digital tablet, making notes without touching a single material or having a real conversation with any crew member. Just cursory introductions and dismissive nods. "These support columns don't meet the specifications in the plans," I told him last Tuesday, pointing to the inadequate reinforcement on the 5th floor. "We need to address this before we continue upward." "The design team has approved the current configuration," he replied without looking up from his screen. "We're moving forward as scheduled." I documented everything meticulously: photos, measurements, emails, and meeting notes. Some might call it covering my back. I called it professional responsibility. Now, in the site office trailer, I watched Alex wait for an outburst that wouldn't come. Men like him expected men like me to lose control when cornered, to shout, to threaten, to create a scene that would justify security intervention. I simply nodded once and gathered my helmet. "I'll clean out my locker." "We've already packed your personal items," he replied, pushing a cardboard box toward me. "Security will escort you to your vehicle." Security? As though I were dangerous. As though nearly 3 decades of showing up early and staying late meant nothing. As though raising legitimate safety concerns made me a threat. I accepted the box without checking the contents and followed the uncomfortable young security guard to my truck. Several crew members paused their work when they saw what was happening. I gave them a slight nod, not goodbye, but something else. Something that said, "Be careful here." As I drove away, I glimpsed Alex already speaking with my replacement, who was nodding enthusiastically, likely promising to keep things moving regardless of the cost. But they hadn't seen the last of me. They just didn't know it yet. I've spent my professional life building structures meant to last generations. My grandfather was a master carpenter who taught me that shortcuts create weaknesses, and weaknesses eventually fail catastrophically. "Do it right the first time," he'd say, "even if no one but you will ever know the difference." This philosophy earned me respect from crews and subcontractors alike. It also cost me opportunities with companies that valued speed over quality. I'd been let go twice before for insisting on proper procedures. Each time, I found another position within weeks. Conscientious site coordinators who genuinely care about code compliance aren't as common as you might hope. My wife, Diane, understood my principles even when they affected our finances. "Your reputation is attached to every building you help create," she'd remind me, "and you have to live with your choices." Horizon had seemed different, at least initially. The company founder, Richard Keller, had built the business on a reputation for quality craftsmanship. I joined 5 years ago when they were still handling modest commercial renovations and smaller developments. Then Richard retired. His daughter Catherine took over. The company quadrupled in size, and suddenly meeting deadlines became more important than doing things properly. The Harborview project was their most ambitious yet, and the pressure from investors was relentless. The first warning sign appeared when they replaced our veteran project manager, Martin Coleman, with Alex Parker. "They're bringing in efficiency experts from the big firms," Martin warned during his last week. "These MBA types care about spreadsheets and investor presentations, not what happens on the ground. Watch yourself, Marcus." I nodded, not realizing how prophetic his warning would be. During Alex's first month, small corners were cut. Safety meetings shortened from 30 minutes to 10. Material inspections became perfunctory. Documentation requirements were streamlined. When I raised concerns, I was labeled old-fashioned and resistant to innovation. I began keeping separate records of all deviations from code and best practices. Digital photos stored in multiple cloud accounts, copies of emails sent from my personal address, voice recordings of conversations where Oregon law permitted. The breaking point came when I discovered they'd substituted lower-grade concrete mixture than what the engineering specifications required on the 6th and 7th floors. The difference wouldn't be obvious to an inspector without testing, but during an earthquake or significant stress event, it could mean structural failure. We need to address this immediately, I told Alex, showing him the comparison with the specifications. He glanced at my documentation and said, "The supplier has assured us this mixture exceeds minimum requirements. We're not delaying the concrete team over this." That was 3 days before my termination. I drove straight home after being escorted off the site, the cardboard box sitting on my passenger seat like an unwelcome companion. Diane wouldn't be back from her teaching position for several hours. I sat in my truck in the driveway, staring at the house we'd purchased 12 years ago. The siding needed replacement on the east wall. I'd been planning to do it myself this summer. Now I had the time, but potentially not the funds. Inside, I placed the box on the kitchen table and finally examined its contents. My thermos, a few reference manuals, the framed photo of Diane and me at Mount Hood. My professional tools were missing: a premium laser level, quality measuring equipment, specialized tools I'd accumulated over decades. About $2,500 worth. I made an inventory of everything missing, then called Human Resources at Horizon's corporate office. The woman who answered sounded uncomfortable when I explained the situation. "I'll look into it, Mr. Reid," she said. "But I should inform you that according to Mr. Parker's report, you were terminated for insubordination and creating workplace disruptions." I hadn't raised my voice once in any interaction with Alex. Not even today. "That's interesting," I replied evenly. "I'd like that in writing, please." "Excuse me. The reasons for my termination. I'd like them formally documented, and I'd like my tools returned. Otherwise, we can discuss this through my attorney." She promised to call back. I hung up and stared at my phone before opening my personal email account. There, in organized folders, was everything I'd documented over the past 6 months. 84 distinct safety violations ranging from minor to potentially catastrophic, all with photographic evidence, all with records of my attempts to address them through proper channels. It wasn't just about being fired anymore. It was about the hundreds of people who would eventually work in that building. It was about the construction crew who didn't know what was being concealed behind drywall and underneath flooring. It was about every shortcut becoming a potentially fatal hazard down the line. I started a new email to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's regional office. The subject line was straightforward: urgent, multiple critical safety violations at Harborview Plaza Development. I worked methodically, organizing the violations by category and severity, cross-referencing code requirements, attaching documentation. For hours, I compiled everything into a comprehensive report. Diane came home and found me still at the computer. "Marcus? What happened?" I told her everything while continuing to work. She stood behind me, her hands resting lightly on my shoulders, reading the screen as I organized the evidence. "They're going to retaliate," she said quietly. "Let them. You might not find work in this city again." I paused, hands hovering over the keyboard. "Some things matter more than a paycheck." She squeezed my shoulders gently. "I know. That's why I married you." I hit send at 10:23 p.m. Then I started another email to the State Building Inspector's office. The call from Alex came at 7:15 the next morning. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Marcus?" His voice was tight with controlled anger. "Good morning, Alex." I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cup in hand. "I just got a call from OSHA saying they've received a complaint about our site with extensive documentation." "Was that you?" I reported legitimate safety concerns. "That's all. You were fired for causing problems, and now you're proving me right." His voice dropped to something almost resembling reason. "Look, Marcus, I understand you're upset, but this vengeful behavior isn't going to help you find another position. In fact, I'm already getting calls from other firms asking about you." The threat was clear. "Keep pushing, and I'd be blacklisted. If the site is up to code, you have nothing to worry about," I replied. He laughed, short and sharp. "We both know inspections can be subjective. One person's violation is another's acceptable variance. But what's not subjective is how the industry views disgruntled employees who try to sabotage projects after being terminated." "Is that what happened to my tools?" I asked. "Sabotage?" A pause. "What tools?" "The ones not returned with my personal effects. I've already filed a police report for theft." That wasn't true yet, but his reaction told me everything. "You know what? Keep the tools. Consider it severance." But drop this OSHA nonsense before you hurt yourself more than you already have. Goodbye, Alex. I hung up and immediately called the police department to file that report. They took the information but didn't sound hopeful about recovery. Next, I contacted 4 construction companies I had relationships with to inquire about positions. 3 didn't return my calls. The 4th, Ridgeway Construction, had the owner's son call me back. "I'd like to help you out, Marcus, I really would," he said. "But we're fully staffed right now, and, well, there's been some talk." "What kind of talk?" "That you're difficult to work with. That you make trouble." He sounded genuinely uncomfortable. "Look, I know my father respects your work, but the industry's tight right now. Maybe try again in a few months when this blows over." By mid-afternoon, I'd received similar responses from 2 more companies. Word travels rapidly in construction circles, especially in a city Portland's size. At 4:45 p.m., my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was an attorney representing Horizon Builders. "Mr. Reid, I'm calling to inform you that any further communication from you regarding the Harborview project could be considered defamatory and result in legal action." "Are you saying the company would sue me for reporting legitimate safety violations to regulatory authorities?" "I'm saying that your characterization of standard industry practices as violations appears to be retaliatory in nature, given the timing. Furthermore, you removed confidential project documentation when you left the company, which constitutes theft of intellectual property." "I hadn't removed anything. All my documentation had been created on my personal devices and stored in my personal accounts. They were laying groundwork to discredit me." "Send me a formal cease and desist if that's your position," I replied. "Otherwise, I have nothing more to say." 3 days later, I received a thick envelope from their law firm. Inside was a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if I continued to malign the company, along with a non-disclosure agreement they claimed I had signed upon hiring. I had signed no such document, but fighting this would require an attorney I couldn't currently afford. They were trying to bury me before the inspectors even arrived at the site. A week after my termination, I was sitting in a cafe downtown when Sophia slid into the booth across from me. Sophia had been my structural engineering contact on the Harborview project, and we'd worked together on multiple projects over the years. "This is probably not a good career move," she said, glancing around nervously. "Probably not," I agreed, pushing my coffee cup aside. "How are things at the site?" "Chaotic. Alex has everyone working overtime to fix the issues before the OSHA inspection. They've scheduled it for next Thursday." I nodded. "They're addressing the concrete mixture problem?" "Yes, but here's the thing, Marcus." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "It goes deeper than what you saw. They've been falsifying materials documentation for months. Remember those foundation stability tests that showed concerning results back in January? They never addressed the issues. They just changed the paperwork." She continued, "Same with the fire-resistant rating on some of the materials. The manufacturer sent a notice about a batch being below specifications, but it was buried." My stomach tightened. "How do you know this?" "Jamie in procurement. She's been keeping her own records because she was worried about liability. When she heard you got fired, she came to me." Sophia slid a USB drive across the table. "Copies of the original documentation versus what was submitted to the inspectors." I stared at the small device, not reaching for it immediately. "Why are you doing this, Sophia? You've got a promising career ahead of you. My parents will be moving into the senior living facility that's planned for the top 3 floors." She met my eyes steadily. "And I was raised to do what's right. Same as you." I picked up the drive. "They'll figure out where this came from." "Probably. But some things are worth the risk." After Sophia left, I walked to the public library and used their computer to review the files. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The documentation showed systematic fraud, not just shortcuts and oversights, but deliberate falsification of safety testing and material quality. This wasn't just about Alex Parker. This went up to corporate level, involving procurement directors and executives. The Harborview project had been bid too low to secure the contract, and now they were making up the difference by using substandard materials. On my way home, I drove past the construction site. The building had reached 8 stories now, its steel frame rising against the Portland skyline. I thought about all the people who would live and work there, unaware of what was hidden in the walls and floors beneath them. When I got home, Diane was waiting with news of her own. "I ran into Elena Vasquez at school today," she said. Elena was married to a city council member. She mentioned that Horizon made substantial donations to the mayor's re-election campaign and several council members last year, right before they got expedited approval for the Harborview zoning variance. The pieces were falling into place. Political connections, rushed approvals, cut corners, falsified documentation. This wasn't just negligence. It was corruption. I called my contact at OSHA that evening and left a voicemail explaining that I had additional documentation that needed to be reviewed before the inspection. Then I forwarded everything from Sophia to both OSHA and the State Building Inspector's office. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from Richard Keller, the retired founder of Horizon Builders. "We need to talk, Marcus," he said, his voice grave. "This goes deeper than you know." I met Richard at his home in the West Hills, overlooking the city. At 70, he still had the calloused hands and straight posture of someone who had spent decades on construction sites before moving into management. "I never should have let Catherine take over," he said as we sat on his deck. "She's always cared more about growth than quality, but I never thought she'd go this far." "You know about the falsified documentation?" Richard nodded. "I've been hearing things from old contacts. When your OSHA complaint hit, several people called me." He took a sip of his coffee. "What you don't know is that Harborview isn't just another project for Horizon. It's the foundation for their bid on the new University Medical Center. That's a $180 million contract." I understood now why they'd reacted so aggressively to my complaint. If OSHA found serious violations at Harborview, they'd lose any chance at the medical center project. "I've been collecting information too," Richard continued. "Catherine doesn't know I still have access to certain company accounts. I've documented irregular payments to city inspectors, the altered test results, everything." He fixed me with a steady gaze. "I built that company on my reputation. I won't let them destroy it or build death traps with my name attached." We spent 2 hours planning our next steps. Richard would approach the board of directors with his evidence, forcing internal action. Meanwhile, I would work with OSHA to ensure the inspection was thorough and couldn't be circumvented. The next day, I received a call from a reporter at the Oregonian. Somehow, she'd heard about the OSHA complaint. "I'm working on a story about construction safety oversight," she explained. "Your name came up as someone with concerns about the Harborview project." I was careful with my words. "I can confirm that I reported safety issues through proper channels. Beyond that, I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. We've heard rumors about falsified safety documentation. Can you confirm that? I would encourage you to request public records related to the project approvals and inspections. That's all I can say for now." The article ran 3 days later, not naming me directly, but mentioning serious allegations from a former site coordinator regarding structural integrity and documentation practices. By that afternoon, the mayor's office had issued a statement expressing full confidence in the city's building inspection process and promising transparent cooperation with regulatory authorities. The next morning, I got a text from Sophia. "OSHA here now. Unscheduled inspection. Multiple inspectors, state officials too." I smiled. The article had accelerated things. 2 hours later, Richard called. "The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. I'm presenting everything. How's Catherine taking it?" "She doesn't know yet. She's at the site dealing with the OSHA situation." Everything was coming together faster than we'd anticipated. That evening, a courier delivered an envelope to my house. Inside was a formal offer of employment from Westridge Development, a respected firm based in Seattle with a Portland division. The owner was an old friend of Richard's, though the letter didn't mention that connection. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Alex terminated. Effective immediately. Corporate team on site, taking over project management." Justice moved swiftly once the dominoes started falling, but I knew Horizon would try to contain the damage by sacrificing Alex while protecting the company's larger interests. They'd claim he acted alone, that corporate had no knowledge of his methods. That's why Richard and I had agreed on one final step. Tomorrow he would provide all his documentation to the State Attorney General's office, along with a formal request for a criminal investigation into corporate fraud. The truth was going to come out. All of it. 3 weeks after my termination, I stood in the back of the City Hall chamber as the Oregon Construction Industry Board announced their findings. Press filled half the seats, with Horizon executives and city officials occupying the front row. Catherine Keller sat stiffly beside the company attorney, her face a mask of professional concern. She'd spent the past 2 weeks positioning herself as the solution rather than the problem, publicly thanking the whistleblowers for bringing isolated incidents of noncompliance to light and promising full cooperation with authorities. The commissioner's voice cut through the murmurs. Following exhaustive investigation, we have identified systematic and deliberate falsification of safety documentation at the Harborview Plaza development. The violations are so severe that we are issuing an immediate stop work order on the project. Camera flashes popped as she continued. Additionally, we are recommending criminal charges against 4 Horizon Builders executives for knowingly endangering public safety through fraudulent practices. One of those executives was Keller. I watched as she leaned over to whisper urgently to her attorney. The lawyer shook his head slightly. There would be no easy escape this time. Richard stood at my side, his expression solemn but resolved. He'd sacrificed his relationship with his daughter to do what was right. Neither of us took pleasure in Horizon's public downfall, but we both understood the necessity. The commissioner finished by thanking the whistleblowers whose documentation had been instrumental in preventing what could have been a future tragedy. She didn't name us, but Catherine turned in her seat, scanning the room until her eyes found mine. I held her gaze steadily, neither angry nor triumphant. Just a man who had done his job, even when it cost him everything. Some principles aren't negotiable. 8 months after the Harborview scandal broke, I stood on the foundation of what would become the new Portland University Medical Center. My hard hat had the Westridge Development logo now, and my title was Director of Construction Safety. The concrete beneath my boots had been poured according to exact specifications, with proper testing and documentation. Every step of the process had been methodically verified and done right. The first time, the Harborview Plaza had been deconstructed down to its foundation and was being rebuilt by a consortium of local construction firms under intense regulatory scrutiny. Horizon Builders no longer existed. The company had dissolved after criminal indictments and civil lawsuits made it impossible to continue operations. Keller had taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony against other executives and the city officials who had looked the other way. Richard had sold his vacation property to help establish a fund for construction workers who had lost jobs in the aftermath. Not everyone had supported my actions. Some in the industry still viewed me as the man who brought down a major company and cost people their livelihoods. Others quietly thanked me for standing up for standards that protected everyone. Sophia was my lead structural engineer now. Jamie from procurement had joined Westridge too. We brought over several good people who shared our commitment to doing things properly. Diane and I had finished replacing the siding on our house ourselves, working evenings and weekends. The physical labor had been therapeutic after months of legal meetings and depositions. "Ready for the inspection?" my assistant asked, approaching with clipboard in hand. "Always," I replied. I'd learned that doing the right thing rarely came without cost. But I'd also discovered that I could sleep at night, look my wife in the eye, and face myself in the mirror each morning. Some victories are measured not in what you gain, but in what you refuse to lose.